Hi everyone, this is part 9, Meeting the SSP Alliance. I was guided to a floor that looked similar to the one I had seen before. There were a lot of meeting rooms as well as one large elevator that was at the far end of the floor. Gonzalez and I were taken into a conference room. A handful of people who were sitting around a conference table all stood up at once. As we walked in, I scanned the room to see some of the SSP Alliance members who I had met with previously. They seemed very nervous to meet Gonzalez and me. I then glanced back at the far end of the table and was shocked to see Sigmund standing down and smirking at me. And there's a depiction, an illustration of Sigmund. And David Wilcock says, Sigmund was a high-ranking Air Force colonel who was supposed to be a key figure as the MIC SSP was disclosed to humanity in an epic surprise. We would suddenly find out that we already had interplanetary capable craft and had found ancient builder race, in quotes, ruins throughout the solar system. Part of the reveal was supposed to include the idea that there was actually no actual living ETs found in the solar system. Only ancient ruins. This surprise was intended to throw off any heat that the deep space might be getting as the Alliance moved to finally defeat them. Sigmund abducted and tortured Corey 12 different times and used him to out members of the SSP Alliance. However, hair samples revealed trace elements Sigmund knew had to be from off-planet locations. He investigated thoroughly and eventually discovered that Corey was telling the truth about the Navy interstellar space program. After this happened, the deep state operatives apparently tried to take Sigmund out. We eventually found out that he had to go on the run. Intuitive empath? I said to Sigmund, wow, this is where you've been. I continued, I'm a bit shocked to see you here after giving my report where I felt as if you may have infiltrated the SSP Alliance. Sigmund stood up and began to shout at me. He said, I had no idea what he has given up here, he yelled. I lost everything. He pointed his finger at my face and said, intuitive empath my ass. There was an awkward pause before one of the men said, please sit down so we can begin. You still don't believe? I sat there while Gonzalez gave a detailed classified report about his time with the Mayans. He also described a series of other beings he visited with the Mayans. I was then asked to give a report of the recent meetings with the Sphere Being Alliance and the Anshar and the Super Federation. As I gave the report, Sigmund sounded off with his disbelief as soon as the blue avians were mentioned. I asked, after all you have seen after joining the SSP Alliance, you still don't believe? He replied back, I have seen the video of the first LOC meeting. I saw the big blue birds. Everyone did. I just don't believe it. He went on to say that he has seen all kinds of technology that could be used to make everyone see these things. North Korea could be a trigger. He then asserted that he thought the Nordics were screwing around with our heads again. I was about to ask him what he meant by again when the meeting was called back to get on point. And David Wilcock says the MIC SSP people do know about the Nordics, or tall whites in quotes. They are also taught that these beings can project many other forms like advanced holograms. This was another method of deep state use, the deep state used on the MIC SSP higher-ups to attempt to, quote-unquote, debunk any cases where they inadvertently saw ETs. I finished my reports and answered about a dozen questions from those around the table. One of the men at the table began to talk about the time frame that the MIC SSP planned to disclose certain info to the public. The scenario of using a war with NOCO, North Korea, to disclose hidden technologies was discussed. As I have mentioned before, we also have talked about the mainstream media sanctioned UFO disclosure effort by the former guitarist of Blink-182, Tom DeLonge. Compromise beyond repair. I asked them why DeLonge was not working with anyone in the ufology field. Sigmund piped up over the person who was about to answer me. He said, because it is compromised beyond any type of repair. He went on to say that ufology had been infiltrated by operatives of the MI6 who had been feeding the experts disinfo for decades. He went on to state that he was personally involved in pulling a number of psyops on this community over the years. He said that ufology and the esoteric communities had also been infiltrated by what he called an Illuminati Luciferian order. He said this group is attempting to seed these fields with religions of the Illuminati. He said that many of those in places of influence are either members of this order or have allowed themselves to be influenced by this quote-unquote order. I interjected, I haven't seen widespread evidence of this. Most of the people I have dealt with are eager to be of service. I know there are a fair share of narcissists and sociopaths who prey on light workers, but I've only run into people with that type of energy a handful of times. No way to put aside UFO religions. He ignored me and stated, once the cat is out of the bag about the widespread Satanism and human trafficking, anyone associated with Lucifer or Satan will be running and hiding. The populace will not care about the subtle or not so subtle differences between these societies. They will lump them all together. One of the men commented that after it all breaks, he expected that a huge number of people will rush back to conservative churches and belief systems from their childhoods. Gonzalez spoke up in disagreement. I have my doubts on that theory. After a number of pastors and clergy who will be exposed as being part of these networks, I would be surprised if anyone returns to organized religion. Sigmund once again seemed to ignore what was being said. He stated that these communities had been gamed so many times that there was no way for them to ever put aside their UFO religion and professional egos and actually come together. Yet this type of organization would be exactly what we would need for us to properly demand disclosure. Why would they? Sigmund then said, now think about how this community reacted during the blatant Rothschild attempt to foment a civil war in this community, while also attempting to discredit a number of individuals in the field. David Wilcock, this was a direct reference to the efforts of what we have called the Dark Alliance. It included death threats against Corey, Emery, and myself, as well as a massive ongoing smear campaign. He continued, why would the Air Force and DIA choose to disclose these technologies through the UFO community? He went on to say that the DIA and Air Force determined that they needed to disclose certain information in a way that couldn't be directly tied to the field of ufology. They planned on making this a nuts and bolts type of discussion that would even leave out the most pragmatic UFO researchers. We moved on to a few other topics, including a flyover tour we would receive of the LOC and the lava tube passengers. This would involve traveling to another facility called LOC Bravo. I have a threat. The person leading the meeting then brought our attention to a large smart glass pad monitor that was being lowered from the ceiling. Sigmund stood up and said, I have a threat. Sorry, not a threat. A treat. Sorry. Doom and gloom in my head. Sigmund stood up and said, I have a treat for both of you. He walked up to the monitor and stared at it while talking. He said they had been monitoring what appeared to be a derelict spacecraft that was headed towards our solar system. This would prove to be the same cigar-shaped asteroid, in quotes, that NASA and the mainstream media dubbed Oumuamua, and they had publicized widely in the same time frame. The ship was monitored as it approached the area where the outer barrier had been erected by the Sphere Being Alliance. The SSP expected the craft to crash into the barrier. They were shocked when it passed directly through that region with no ill effects on the craft whatsoever. It turned out that the barrier had already been depleted by then, but this was the first time the SSP Alliance had ever realized what had happened. Wait until you hear what we found. And I'm going to leave it at this just so we can keep continuity. I'll start section or part 10 with the description of what happens with their visit to the Oumuamua craft.